Hi students, today we are going to go through your Pythagorean Theorem study guide for your test. Alright, so the first one, determine if a triangle with side measurements 3, 5, and 6 form a right triangle. So remember to figure out if three numbers of side lengths on a triangle form a right triangle or not. All that you're doing is you're plugging in those numbers into the Pythagorean Theorem to figure out if your a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And out of these three numbers, the most important number is the largest number, because your largest number is always your hypotenuse, which is your c. So I know for sure that I want to plug in 6 for c, but your legs, it doesn't matter which one you plug in for a or b. So let's say I plug in 3 for a and 5 for b. Then all you have to do now is just simplify this to see if your left side of your equation equals the right side. So 3 squared is 9, 5 squared is 25, and 6 squared is 36. Then if I simplify the left side one more time, so 9 plus 25 gives me 34. So does 34 equal 36? It does not. So this does not form a right triangle. Okay. Next one, find the length of the unknown side. Round your answer to the nearest tenth. So as you guys can see here, we are looking for a leg because the 24 is talking about the hypotenuse, because that's the number opposite of the right angle. And your legs are what form the right angle here. So when I use my formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Also, before I forget, make sure you guys write down the formula for every single problem. And I'm just going to start plugging in my numbers. So I always plug in my hypotenuse first if it's there, because I want to make sure that I plug it in for C. And I'm going to plug in 6 for one of the legs, and then I am going to find the other leg. Alright, so simplify. So 6 squared is 36. Keep the b squared. 24 squared gives me 576. To get b squared by itself, I'm just going to subtract 36 from both sides. So we get b squared equals 540. And then your last step to get b by itself is to square root it. So the square root of 540, if I round it to the nearest tenths, so I'm looking at the tenths place and I'm looking at the number behind it. If it's 5 or greater, then I'll round the 2 up to a 3. If not, I'll leave the 2 alone. So since this number is not 5 or greater, I'm going to leave it as 23.2. Alright, next one. Find the length of the hypotenuse. Round your answer to the nearest hundredths. Alright, so again, we're using our formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Since we're finding the hypotenuse, that means that my c is going to stay a variable, and then I'm just going to plug in my legs for a and b. Alright, so 9 squared would give us 81, 12 squared is 144. Since these are on the same side, we are just going to add them together. So 81 plus 144 is 225. And then to get c by itself, you just square root it. So the square root of 25 gives us a whole number of 15. Alright, and then last one on the front page here. A right triangle has the following lengths. One of the legs is 8 and a hypotenuse of 15. Find the length of the third side. Round your answer to the nearest tenth if necessary. Okay, so as always, start with that formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I am going to just start plugging in my numbers where they belong. So again, your hypotenuse is your biggest number, and that's your c. And then your legs, it does not matter which one you plug it in for. And then your legs, it does not matter which one you plug it in for, A or B. Okay, so let's start simplifying. So 8 squared is 64. 15 squared is 225. To get b squared by itself, I need to move the 64 over to the other side by subtracting it. So I get b squared equals 225 minus 64 is 161. And then to get b by itself, I'm just going to square root both sides. So we get b equals, and square root of 161 is 12.68. So rounding to the tenths place, look at the 6 and look at the number behind it. If it's 5 or greater, the 6 would become a 7. So our answer here would be 12.7. All right, moving on to the second page. A 10-meter ladder is placed 5 meters from a building as shown by the diagram below. Which equation could be used to find how far up the side of the building the ladder is? So whenever you guys get to this problem and you guys see all of these things down here and you're like, I have no idea, act like these aren't even here right now, okay? And just start setting this up like normal. So they're wanting to know what is the height from the ground to the ladder. So if I do my a squared plus b squared equals c squared, notice how my right angle is right here. So that means that I'm trying to find one of the legs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in my hypotenuse in for c. I'm going to plug in one of the legs in for a or b. And then I'm trying to figure out the other one. So once you get to this position right here, then come over here and look to see if anything looks very similar to that. So as you guys can see, 5 squared plus b squared equals 10 squared is right here for letter B. So I'm just going to circle that, and then you guys don't have to solve it. Okay, so again, I know this may look confusing over here, so that's why I said act like this isn't even here first and just set it up as you normally would. And then once you get to this step after you substitute, then come over here and check to see where it's at. Okay. All right, next one. A tree stands 46 feet tall. It casts a shadow that is 38 feet long. Find the distance from the top of the tree to the end of the shadow. Round your answer to the nearest tenth if necessary. Okay, so I told my students to draw a picture because it is 10 times easier to look at a picture and figure out where your numbers go based off your picture. So here's my tree, and it says that it stands 46 feet tall, so that's talking about how tall it is. So that's 46 feet. And then it says that it casts a shadow that is 38 feet long. So a shadow you guys see on the ground. So that means that this shadow would be 38 feet. And they're wanting to know what's the distance of the top of the tree to the end of the shadow. So in this case, we are trying to find the hypotenuse. Because when I draw my right triangle, here's my right angle. These two sides are my legs, and the side opposite of that right angle is the hypotenuse. Okay, so let's find the hypotenuse here. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to plug in my numbers for a and b. So 38 squared and 46 squared, and keep c squared alone. And then now we're just going to solve it. So 38 squared is 1444. 46 squared is 2116. Add these two numbers together, we get 3,560. And then your last step to get c by itself is to square root both sides. So you get 59 points, round to the nearest tenth. We would get 59.7. 59.7. And this is a word problem, so make sure you label your answer. So 59.7 feet. All right, next one. What's the distance from the garden to the kitchen? Round your answer to the nearest hundredths if needed. Okay, so if you guys remember Pythagorean Theorem on a coordinate plane here, whenever you are trying to find the distance of a diagonal, remember that your diagonal is your hypotenuse, okay? And remember, you can't count this. There's no way that you can count to figure out this number, okay? So what you have to do is you have to create your own right triangle so that then you can at least count your legs and then use your Pythagorean theorem to figure out what your hypotenuse is, okay? So here's my right triangle. I just made two lines until they meet at one point. And then now I'm just going to count like we do with slope to figure out what are the side lengths. So from the garden to this point, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then from the kitchen to this point, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then now we can solve for the hypotenuse. So we have legs of 8 and 5. So I'm going to plug in 8 and 5 in for my A and B. And then now I'm just going to start simplifying. So 8 squared is 64, 5 squared is 25, 64 plus 25 is 89. And then to get C by itself, I'm just going to square root it. So the square root of 89 rounded to the nearest hundredths now. So the hundredths is two numbers after the decimal point. So 9.43. Now I'm looking at the 3 here. And I'm looking at the number behind it. If it's 5 or greater, then I'll round it up. If not, I'll leave it alone. So in this case, I will leave it alone. So our answer is 9.43. All right, next page. So here's another Pythagorean theorem on a coordinate plane. So they want you to find the hypotenuse. So that means this length right here. Like we did on the last problem, you can't find the hypotenuse by just counting. So what you have to do is you have to figure out your side lengths. So like for the bottom, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. For the height, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you will use those numbers to help you find the Pythagorean theorem, okay? So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we're finding the hypotenuse. I'm going to plug in my legs and for a and b. So we'll get 25 plus 16 equals c squared. 25 plus 16 is 41. And then I'll take the square root on both sides to get c by itself. And it says round to the nearest tenth. I know it's kind of cut off by the staple here. But it would be 6.4. All right, so number 9 says to explain and solve using correct mathematics vocabulary how to use the Pythagorean theorem to determine the unknown side length of the given diagram. So what you guys will do first is you just need to solve it like normal. So as you guys can see, my right angle is down here by the lighthouse, and I am trying to find one of the legs. So the first thing that we'll need to do is just solve it so that then we can take this step by step when we go to explain it, okay? So we have our a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Your hypotenuse is always your c, that's your largest number. And then I'm just going to start plugging in my other leg in for a or b. Okay? So now we're just going to start solving it. So 400 squared is 160,000. 500 squared is 250,000. And if I want to get b squared by itself, I'll subtract that 160,000 from both sides. And that leaves us with b squared equals 90,000. And then to get b by itself, just square root, and we get b equals 300 yards. Okay? So all that you guys will need to do is just explain what you just did. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys my explanation. And we want you guys to be as thorough as possible, okay? Especially when you go to explain. You need to explain everything step by step. So that's why you guys see a lot of lines down here, because we do expect you to write a lot whenever it deals with the Pythagorean theorem. So here's what I put, okay? So I said first you determine that the missing side length is a leg of the triangle. You then know to plug in the other leg, 400, in for A in the equation. B will be your missing side length, and your hypotenuse, C, will be 500. Then you solve by squaring 400 and 500. Then to get B by itself, you need to subtract 160,000 from both sides. And then your last step is to take the square root of 25,000 minus 16. That should be 160,000. So 250,000 minus 160,000, and you get an answer of 300. I forgot a couple zeros here. Okay, so there is a way, I mean, I know that there's different ways to write your explanations, especially if Some of you guys want to make it a little shorter, but you still have to be detailed with every single step that you're doing. Okay, so like just start here. Tell me that Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Tell me that how you knew to plug in 400 for a leg and how you need to plug in 500 for c, and then just tell me the process. So just take it step by step and then just write that into sentences. Okay? Alright, so you guys can pause the video if you don't have that done yet. Moving on to the next page here. It says, in the right triangle, AB is longer than side BC, and the box numbers represent the possible side lengths of triangle ABC. Identify 3 box numbers that could be the side lengths of triangle ABC. Write the number you chose to represent each side length. So we had a question similar to this on the quiz, and I highly suggest that the first thing that you guys do, because as we know, your a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The first thing that I would do is I would just start squaring all of these numbers and make another table to represent them, so that then it's a little bit easier to see, okay, so if I add these 2 numbers, then that would equal the hypotenuse, which means that it would be a right triangle. Okay, so if I just start squaring these, 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36, 8 squared is 64, 9 squared 81, this would be 144, 169, 225, and 256. Okay, so all I did was I just squared the numbers and made another table. So now I'm just trying to figure out, okay, so if I were to add like these 2 numbers, 25 plus 81, that gives me 106. So is there a 106 on here? No. Okay, so I have to try something else. If I take 64 plus 36, that's 100. Is there 100 on here? Nope. So it's kind of just a guessing game. So you're just adding 2 numbers together to see if there's another number on there. So there are 2 numbers that I see right away. If I were to take 25 plus 144, so 25 plus 144, notice how that gives me 169, and notice how we do have a 169 on here. So those are 3 possible numbers that we can use, is the 25, which was 5, 144, which was 12, and then the 169, which is 13. Okay. Another set of numbers that work, I believe, is the 9, 12, and 15. And I think that's it. So there are 2 choices that you can have here. Okay, so please just make sure that you have one of these written down. And when we put the hypotenuse AB, your biggest number has to go in this spot. Okay, for your other 2 numbers, the leg, it doesn't matter, but you definitely have to have your hypotenuse in for C here. Okay. All right. Triangle ABC has side lengths 6, 8, and 10. Determine whether the triangle is a right triangle or not. Part A says to draw a diagram of the triangle with the following labels. So it says to label the angles A, B, and C. So we have a triangle. And they want us to label it ABC. So let's just say this one's A, this one's B, and this one's C. And then it says to label the side lengths 6, 8, and 10. So again, you know that your biggest number has to be your hypotenuse. So wherever you put your right angle at, your hypotenuse has to go opposite of it. And then it does not matter where you put your 6 and 8 at, because those are your legs. Okay. Next part says to use your Pythagorean theorem to determine if the diagram you created is a right triangle or not. So we're going to use our a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I'm going to plug in 6 and 8 for the legs, and I'm going to plug in 10 for the hypotenuse, and then I'm just going to start simplifying. Nope. And I notice that 100 does equal 100, so I know that it is a right triangle. So then your last part down here says to explain your reasoning in part B using correct mathematical vocabulary. So this is similar to the question on the back side. So again, we want you guys to use mathematical vocabulary and to write in complete sentences. So what I wrote was, to determine if 6, 8, and 10 form a right triangle, you have to plug the numbers into the Pythagorean theorem. 6 and 8 are the legs, and 10 is the hypotenuse. If 6 squared plus 8 squared equals 10 squared, then our numbers will form a right triangle. And in this case, it does. Okay? So, again, you're just explaining your reasoning on why this did form a right triangle. Okay? So you can pause the video to write that down, but I'm going to move on to the last question here. All right, the gaming store is 8 miles west of the outlet mall. An amusement park is 15 miles south of the gaming store. Explain why the outlet mall and the amusement park are not 20 miles apart. Draw a diagram if needed. Okay, so I'm just going to start here with the gaming store, and it says that it's 8 miles west of the outlet mall. So if you guys remember on our compass, it goes north, east, south, and west. And if it says that the gaming store is 8 miles west of the outlet mall, west is to the left, so that means that the outlet mall is over here somewhere, and the gaming store would be over here. Okay, and it says that they are 8 miles apart. So this would be represented by 8 miles. And then it says that the amusement park is 15 miles south of the gaming store. So if the gaming store was here, the amusement park would be 15 miles south of that. Oh, I should put 15 miles here. And we'll put amusement park here. Okay. And then they are wanting to know, why is the distance from the amusement park to the outlet mall not equal to 20? And they want you to explain that. Okay. So one thing that you can do first is just plug in the numbers into the Pythagorean theorem to see why it doesn't equal 20. Okay, so like if I were to plug in my numbers, so a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and if I plugged in 15, my legs 15 and 8, and for a and b, and let's say I go ahead and plug in 20 for c. Okay, because they're saying that it's not 20, so let's figure out why it's not 20. Okay, then start simplifying. So 225 plus 64 equals 20 squared is 400. Add these two numbers together and you get 289. So does 289 equal 400? It does not. So this is one thing that you guys can write about, is saying that whenever you plug in your legs 15 and 8 into the Pythagorean theorem and you simplified your equation, you got 289. And if you were to plug in 20 for c, you got 400. So since 289 does not equal 400, that means that you're not going to have a right triangle. Okay? So this is one way to do it, and then obviously just make sure you explain what I just said, okay? Or another way to do it, and this is what I did last year, is you can figure out what C is actually supposed to be. So if you plug in 15 and 8 in for your legs and keep C alone, then you can use this to figure out that C is really supposed to be 17. So then your reasoning could be, whenever I solved for the hypotenuse, it should be 17 and not 20. And then obviously just explain more in detail. Okay, so there's a couple different ways that you can do this one. Just make sure that whichever way you pick, you explain it based off of your work that you showed. Okay, so this is your test. If you have any questions, please let your teacher know. Thank you.